Marcus pedaled slowly through the wide streets of the neighborhood, his old bicycle rattling with every bump. The morning sun was warm on his back, and the stack of packages in the basket balanced carefully, threatening to tip over with the slightest mistake. His uniform was faded from years of use, the blue color now closer to gray. His shoes, worn out at the toes, squeaked when he walked. To anyone watching, he looked like just another delivery man trying to make a living. But to Marcus, it was simply another day of work. The neighborhood he entered was one of the richest in the city. Large houses stood tall with white fences, polished lawns, and shiny cars parked in front. The smell of fresh flowers and trimmed grass filled the air. Everything looked perfect, everything looked expensive. For Marcus, it was a world that seemed far away from his own life, yet it was part of his daily route. He was used to delivering packages here, but each time, he felt the eyes of people on him, curious, cold, and sometimes unfriendly. As he stopped his bicycle at the entrance of one of the biggest houses, a small group of people noticed him. They were neighbors who often gathered outside in the mornings to chat and enjoy their coffee. Their clothes were neat, their jewelry shining in the sunlight, and their smiles were wide. But not the kind of smiles that welcomed a stranger. When their eyes fell on Marcus, the atmosphere changed. A few of them leaned closer to whisper, and then soft laughter escaped their lips. Marcus heard it. He always did. The whispers, the chuckles, the mocking glances, he had grown used to them. Some people laughed at his old bike, some at his uniform, and some just because of the color of his skin. He knew it wasn't fair, but he had learned to keep his head high and his voice calm. He reminded himself that he had work to do, and nothing they said could take away his dignity. Still, the sting of their laughter reached him. As he pulled out a package and walked toward the gate, he noticed one man shaking his head with a grin as if the very sight of him was amusing. Another whispered something that made the others laugh harder. Marcus didn't know what they said, but he didn't need to. Their expression said enough. They didn't see him as a person. To them, he was just a poor courier, a nobody in their world of wealth. But Marcus carried himself differently. He straightened his back, balanced the package carefully in his hands, and walked with quiet confidence. He did not respond to their mockery with anger or bitterness. Instead, he kept his eyes on his task. Every step he took was steady, as though their laughter had no power over him. Inside, though, he felt a mix of emotions. He wondered why people judged so quickly, why they found it so easy to laugh at someone who was simply working to earn a living. Did they think less of him because he wasn't driving a car like theirs? Because his uniform wasn't new? Or was it just because he was different from them in ways he could never change? The gate opened with a creak, and Marcus offered the package with a polite smile. The security guard, who had seen Marcus many times before, nodded and signed for it. Marcus thanked him softly and turned back toward his bicycle. Behind him, the laughter had quieted for a moment, but he could still feel the eyes following him. As he walked, the sun caught the faint stitching on his delivery bag, the faded letters of his last name. He didn't notice it, but one of the neighbors did. She frowned, recognizing something about it, but the thought quickly passed. For now, all they saw was a man in an old uniform riding a broken bicycle. Marcus climbed back onto his bike and took a deep breath. He reminded himself of the promise he made long ago, to work with honesty, to stay humble, and to never let the cruelty of others change his kindness. The road ahead stretched long and quiet, but Marcus pedaled forward, carrying not just packages, but a strength no one around him could yet see. The neighborhood's laughter faded behind him, but the story was only beginning. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that the man they mocked was someone whose name they would never forget, and soon their own smiles would vanish, replaced with shock and silence. Marcus leaned his bicycle against the iron gate and brushed the dust from his sleeves. He was focused only on the package in his hand. It was a heavy box, carefully labeled, and he wanted to make sure it reached the right person. He moved with calm steps, his face set with quiet determination. But as he walked closer, the voices behind him grew louder. At first, it was just a few whispers, sharp enough to cut the air. "Look at that old bike," one man muttered with a smirk. "I wouldn't even throw it in the trash. His uniform looks like it's older than my grandmother," another added, laughing softly. The group of neighbors chuckled, their laughter spreading like a small fire. They were dressed in polished clothes, suits, silk dresses, shining shoes, and the sight of Marcus in his faded outfit amused them. He looked out of place in their perfect world, and that was enough for them to make him the morning's entertainment. One woman, holding a cup of coffee in her manicured hand, tilted her head and whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I bet he doesn't even live in this city. Probably sleeps in some tiny room far away." Her friends laughed again, their smiles wide, their voices cruel. Marcus heard every word. He felt the sting in his chest, but he didn't stop. He told himself, deliver the package. That's all. Don't let them win. He kept his eyes lowered, but his pace was steady, refusing to show weakness. The laughter only grew bolder. "Hey, courier," one man called out. "Be careful with that box, it's probably worth more than your whole bike." The group burst into laughter again, some even clapping at the cruel joke. Marcus paused for the briefest second, gripping the package tighter. His jaw clenched, but he still did not respond. Instead, he forced a small, polite smile and kept walking. To him, dignity was not in shouting back. It was in staying calm when others tried to break you. But the neighbors mistook his silence for weakness. They leaned closer to each other, whispering again, their eyes scanning him like he was nothing more than a stranger to be mocked. To them, he was invisible as a person, just another worker, someone who didn't belong. Then came the cruelest laugh. A young man, perhaps in his 30s, leaned on his shiny car and shook his head. "Imagine living like that," he sneered. "Day after day carrying boxes for people who have real jobs. That's no life. That's just survival." The words hit Marcus hard. He had heard things like that before, on the streets, in stores, sometimes even from people he tried to befriend. But it still hurt because it came from people who had no idea who he really was. They looked only at his uniform, his bike, his skin, and decided they knew everything about him. He wanted to speak, to tell them something, anything, but he stopped himself. He remembered his mother's words from long ago. "Son, silence can be stronger than anger. Let your actions speak for you. The world will see the truth when it is time." So Marcus held his tongue. He straightened his back, lifted the package higher, and gave a small nod to the guard at the gate. His every move was quiet strength, though none of the laughing neighbors saw it that way. For a moment, the laughter slowed. One woman squinted, noticing the faint stitching on his delivery bag again. The letters of his last name, nearly rubbed away with time. She frowned as though something about it stirred a memory, but before she could think more, someone cracked another joke and the group burst out laughing again. Marcus walked back to his bike, his face calm but his heart heavy. Every laugh behind him echoed in his ears. Every cruel word tried to pull him down. But deep inside he knew something they didn't. He carried a truth that would one day silence them all. And as he pedaled away from the house, the sound of their laughter chasing after him, Marcus whispered under his breath, "One day, you'll know who I am." That day was not far away, and when it came, the very people who laughed the loudest would struggle to find their voices again. Marcus steadied his breath as he placed the heavy package safely in the guard's hands. The laughter behind him still echoed, but he did not let it change the calm expression on his face. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like he didn't care, but inside he carried the weight of every cruel word. Instead of answering the mocking voices, Marcus chose a different kind of reply: silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of strength. His mother had always told him, "Son, you don't have to shout to prove your worth. Quiet dignity is louder than noise." And Marcus believed that. So he straightened his back, lifted his chin slightly, and smiled. It was not a smile of joy, but one of self-control. He refused to give the mockers the satisfaction of seeing him break. His calmness was a shield, and behind it lived a strength none of them could understand. The neighbors, still gathered in their polished clothes and shining jewelry, noticed his silence. Some expected him to argue, to shout, maybe even to storm away angrily. But Marcus did none of those things. Instead, he carried himself like a man who knew something they didn't. That unsettled them, though they hid it behind laughter. One woman whispered, "Why doesn't he say anything? He just stands there smiling." Another man shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Because he knows he's beneath us." That's why, but Marcus wasn't beneath anyone. He knew who he was, and he knew what he was capable of. His silence wasn't weakness, it was power. He walked back to his bicycle, moving with deliberate care. His shoes squeaked softly on the clean pavement, a sound that seemed almost too loud in the hush between bursts of laughter. He adjusted the strap of his bag, checked the next delivery slip, and nodded to himself. Every action was calm, almost graceful. The group's amusement wavered. Their laughter grew softer. A few of them watched him with puzzled eyes now, as if wondering why he didn't crack under their words. Mockery usually brought anger or shame, but this man, this courier, carried himself like he had nothing to prove, and that confused them. Marcus mounted his old bicycle, but before leaving he looked back, not at them, but at the street ahead. His gaze was steady, focused on the long road before him. The morning sun hit his face, highlighting the sweat on his brow, but also the determination in his eyes. The guard at the gate, who had seen Marcus many times, gave a small, respectful nod. He admired the young man's calmness, though he never said it aloud. As Marcus pedaled away, the group of neighbors fell quieter. They didn't know why, but something about him didn't fit the picture they had painted. He wasn't angry, he wasn't broken, he was unshaken. What they didn't know was that Marcus carried a reason for that strength. Every morning before leaving his small apartment, he reminded himself why he worked as a courier. He wasn't doing it out of need alone, he was doing it by choice. To understand people, to see life from the ground up, to never forget where he came from. The insults hurt, yes, but they couldn't bend him. He had already faced tougher battles, heavier burdens, and one day soon, the truth about who he really was would shine so bright that no laughter could cover it. The neighbors returned to their chatter, though less lively than before. A strange unease lingered in their hearts. They had mocked him, yet he left as if their words were too small to touch him. They didn't know why, but it made them restless. Marcus, meanwhile, rode on. The street stretched wide and endless, but each turn of his bicycle wheels carried him closer to the moment that would change everything. He kept his silence, his strength, and his smile, because sometimes the quietest man in the room holds the loudest truth, and soon, the world around him would learn that truth in a way they would never forget. The sun had risen higher in the sky, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood. Marcus had already delivered the first package and was preparing to ride on, but the whispers behind him had not stopped completely. While some of the neighbors went back to sipping their coffee and polishing their conversations, one woman, Mrs. Collins, kept staring at him with a puzzled look. She was not like the others who laughed the loudest. She was older, wiser perhaps, and though she had smiled faintly at the jokes earlier, her eyes told a different story now. Something about Marcus's presence unsettled her, not in a bad way, but in a way that stirred her memory. Her gaze traveled to his delivery bag. The fabric was old, the stitches loose, but she noticed the faint letters sewn into the side. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but then she leaned forward, narrowing her vision. The letters were almost rubbed away with time, but she could still make out the name. Collins, her own last name. Her heart skipped. That name was no ordinary one. It belonged to one of the most powerful business families in the city. Years ago, the founder of the Collins Group, a global company known everywhere, had given that very name weight and respect, and here it was again, stitched onto the bag of a courier. Strange, she whispered to herself. Another neighbor noticed her frown and asked, "What is it, Margaret? Why are you staring at him like that?" Mrs. Collins shook her head quickly, brushing it off. "Oh, nothing. Just thought I saw something." She forced a smile, but her thoughts raced. As Marcus adjusted his bag and prepared to pedal to his next stop, she couldn't shake the feeling. Could it be coincidence? A name shared by chance? Or was there more to this quiet young man than met the eye? Her curiosity grew sharper when she saw how Marcus carried himself. He didn't act like most workers she knew. There was something composed about him. He didn't flinch at insults. He didn't stumble or rush. Every step seemed measured, as if he had been raised to value dignity, even under fire. Odd, she muttered again, her coffee cooling in her hand. The others noticed her distraction. One man chuckled. "Don't overthink it, Margaret. He's just another courier. Look at him, old bike, old shoes, nothing more." But Mrs. Collins wasn't so sure. As Marcus pedaled away, she kept her eyes on his back. The neighbors soon returned to their light-hearted gossip, their laughter echoing once more. But her mind was no longer in the present. It was drifting back to the stories she had once heard, about the Collins heir who had disappeared from the public eye. Rumors had swirled for years. Some said he left the family empire to live a normal life. Others said he wanted to see the world as ordinary people did. Could it be him? No, she thought, shaking her head. That would be impossible. Why would someone with power and wealth choose to ride a broken bicycle and deliver packages? It made no sense. And yet, the name stitched on that bag whispered otherwise. Mrs. Collins decided not to speak further, but her eyes followed Marcus until he disappeared around the corner. Her curiosity had been awakened, and it would not let her rest. Something told her that the young man the others laughed at was not what he seemed. Something told her that the truth about him would be bigger than they could imagine. For now, the neighbors were blind to it. They saw only a poor delivery man, a figure to mock and dismiss. But Margaret Collins had seen a spark, a detail they had missed. And deep in her chest she felt a growing unease, a sense that soon the laughter would end and the truth would silence them all. Marcus, meanwhile, rode on quietly, unaware of the seed of suspicion he had planted. His journey was not just about packages, it was about purpose. And every turn of his bicycle wheel carried him closer to the moment when masks would fall, and his real identity would finally come to light. Later that evening, the wealthy neighborhood was alive with its usual rhythm. Cars purred into driveways, lights flickered on in large windows, and neighbors gathered again to exchange stories of their day. But among them, one whisper kept circling: the courier. Mrs. Collins had not spoken much after the morning, but the curiosity in her eyes had not faded. The faint letters she saw in Marcus's bag replayed in her mind like a song she could not silence. She knew that name. She knew it well. It was not a name you could simply ignore. While others laughed again about the poor man with the broken bike, she felt something tighten inside her. She excused herself from the group, went back into her house, and opened an old drawer. Inside were clippings, photos, and articles from years ago. She pulled one out, an old newspaper piece about the Collins Group, the empire her late husband's family had helped build. The picture showed the founder, an older man with kind eyes, standing proudly with a young boy beside him. Her chest tightened as she looked at the child. His face, it had the same calm strength she had seen in Marcus's eyes that morning. Her hands trembled. Could it be possible? Could that quiet courier truly be the boy who had vanished from public view years ago? The heir who many claimed had rejected his fortune to walk among ordinary people? The idea sounded impossible, yet her heart told her otherwise. The next day, whispers turned to questions. People in the neighborhood started noticing small details. Marcus never hurried, never seemed desperate. His silence felt different, almost like someone trained to endure eyes watching him. One man recalled that his delivery slip carried the name Marcus Collins. Another remembered seeing him speaking politely with officials at the local post office as though they respected him more than a simple worker. Rumors began to grow. By the afternoon, the name was on everyone's lips. Collins, the same as the family empire that controlled businesses across the city. The shocking truth began to spill out. Marcus was not just a courier. He was Marcus Collins, grandson of the company founder. The boy who had once stood beside his grandfather in photographs. The child who had disappeared from public life after a family tragedy. Many had assumed he went abroad. Others believed he was living in luxury, hidden from the world, but no, he had chosen this life. He had chosen to walk streets no one expected him to ride an old bicycle, to carry packages with his own hands. He wanted to understand how ordinary people lived, to feel the struggles they faced, to see the world from the ground instead of from a tower of glass and wealth. When the truth reached the neighborhood, the same people who mocked him felt their faces burn with shame. Their laughter dried up. The cruel jokes that had once rolled off their tongues now tasted bitter. One woman gasped when she read the news online. Marcus Collins, heir to the Collins Group fortune, seen working incognito as a courier to learn about society at the ground level. The article had a photo, Marcus on his bicycle, bag over his shoulder, sweat on his brow. The same man they had laughed at only yesterday. Their smiles faded, replaced by silence. They remembered every cruel word they had spoken. Every chuckle, every insult now felt like a heavy stone on their conscience. That evening, when Marcus returned to the same neighborhood for another delivery, the air was different. No one laughed this time. No one whispered. Instead, they watched him with wide eyes, ashamed and unsettled. Marcus carried the package as calmly as always, his back straight, his face gentle. He did not gloat, did not seek revenge. He was the same man they had mocked, calm, respectful, silent. But now they knew who he was, and that knowledge cut deeper than any sharp reply he could have given. For the first time, the neighbors looked at him not as a poor courier, but as someone greater than they had ever imagined. The man they had dismissed as beneath them was standing above them in ways they could never reach. The truth had been revealed. The courier was no ordinary man. He was Marcus Collins, the heir, the leader in waiting, and the lesson they would never forget. And as he pedaled away, the sound of his bicycle wheels was louder than all their laughter combined. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. The usual chatter and laughter that floated through the air was missing. The neighbors who once stood proudly at their gates with steaming cups of coffee now kept their voices low, their eyes restless. The news had spread everywhere. Marcus, the man they mocked as a poor courier, was none other than Marcus Collins, heir to the Collins Group. No one wanted to admit they had been part of the laughter, but the memory clung to them like a shadow. They remembered their words too clearly. Look at that old bike. That uniform is pathetic. He's beneath us. Each line replayed in their heads, sharper now, heavier now, because they knew the truth. When Marcus returned on his usual route, silence greeted him. The same people who once smirked and sneered now lowered their eyes. Some stepped aside, pretending to be busy with their phones or their gardens. But he noticed. Their avoidance was louder than their laughter had ever been. Marcus parked his bike by the gate, calm as always. He lifted a package, balanced it in his arms, and walked forward with steady steps. His silence was the same as before, but now it felt different. Before they thought it was weakness. Now they understood. It was strength. A man who had laughed the loudest 2 days ago tried to greet him. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," he stammered, forcing a smile. His voice cracked and he quickly looked away. Marcus gave him a small nod, polite but distant. No anger, no gloating, just quiet acknowledgement. That hurt the man more than any harsh word could have. Another neighbor, the woman who once joked about him living in a tiny room, shifted uncomfortably on her porch. She wanted to apologize, to erase her words, but shame glued her lips shut. For the first time, she realized how cruel she had sounded. She wondered how a man of such status must have felt, listening to her insult his life without knowing who he truly was. The silence thickened as Marcus walked back to his bicycle. The neighbors watched him closely, not with mockery this time, but with unease. Their smiles were gone, replaced by faces pale with regret. Marcus did not need to say anything. His presence was enough. Every turn of his bicycle wheels reminded them of their failure. Not because he was rich, not because he was an heir, but because they had judged a man unfairly, simply by his appearance. Later that evening, when the neighbors gathered as usual, the mood was heavy. No one joked. No one laughed about the courier anymore. Instead, their words were broken confessions. "I didn't mean what I said," one man muttered, though no one responded. "I wish I hadn't laughed," whispered another Mrs. Collins. The only one who had suspected the truth earlier shook her head. It was never about who he was. It was about who we showed ourselves to be. We failed. We mocked kindness and we mocked dignity. Wealth doesn't excuse cruelty. Her words sank into the group, leaving them even quieter. For the first time, they realized the shame was not in discovering Marcus's identity. It was in discovering their own. They had revealed their true selves in their laughter, and now they couldn't hide from it. The silence of shame lingered for days. When Marcus came again, no one dared to mock him. Some tried to be polite, offering greetings or small smiles, but Marcus remained the same. Calm, respectful, untouchable. He didn't need revenge. His dignity was enough to make them confront their guilt. Deep inside, the neighbors understood that they had been taught a lesson without Marcus ever saying a word. They had laughed at a man who carried himself with more strength and humility than they could imagine. And now, their silence was their punishment. From then on, whenever they saw the courier riding his old bicycle, they no longer saw a poor man. They saw the truth. A man stronger than their laughter. A man untouched by their cruelty. A man who reminded them that respect is not earned by money or titles, but by the way one carries themselves through the storms of life. And though Marcus never spoke of it, the neighborhood would never forget the silence of their own shame. Days passed, but the memory of their laughter clung to the neighbors like a stubborn shadow. Every time Marcus appeared at the gate, balancing packages on his bicycle, they remembered the words they had spoken, the jokes they had shared, and the way they had mocked him without mercy. But now, instead of laughter, they felt a heavy silence and a burning guilt in their chests. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Marcus finally chose to speak, not to scold, not to humiliate, but to remind them of something greater. He had just finished handing over a package to the guard when he turned back, his calm eyes sweeping over the faces of those who stood nearby. They froze under his gaze. Some looked down, others shuffled nervously, waiting for him to say something. Marcus's voice was soft, but it carried like thunder in the silence. "Respect is not something you give only to the rich or powerful," he said. "It belongs to every human being, no matter how they look, no matter what they do for a living." The neighbors felt their cheeks burn. His words weren't angry, but they pierced deeper than anger ever could. He continued, "The day you laugh at someone for being different, you reveal more about yourself than about them. You show the world what kind of heart you carry." No one dared interrupt. Even the birds seemed to pause their song, as though the entire street listened. Marcus looked down at his worn-out shoes, then back at them. "I chose this work because I wanted to see the world without titles, without luxury. I wanted to understand people, to see how kindness or cruelty shows itself when someone thinks you are small. And now I know." His words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Every neighbor present remembered the way they had smirked, the way they had mocked his bicycle, his clothes, his skin. They thought of how quickly they had judged him, and how wrong they had been. Mrs. Collins, the older woman who had first suspected the truth, stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You are right, Marcus. We failed you. We failed ourselves, and I am ashamed." Her admission broke the silence. Others followed, some muttering apologies, some unable to find the courage to speak but bowing their heads in guilt. Marcus listened, but he did not smile in triumph. He only nodded. "Apologies are words. What matters is how you change after this. If you can treat me with respect only because of who my family is, then you've learned nothing. But if you can treat the next courier, the next worker, the next stranger with dignity, then you will have learned everything." The lesson was clear. It wasn't about Marcus being an heir to a powerful family. It was about the truth that dignity has no uniform, no skin color, no bicycle, no price tag. Every person deserves it. The neighbors stood in silence long after Marcus rode away. His old bicycle squeaked as he disappeared down the street, but the echo of his words stayed behind. From that day forward, the neighborhood began to change. The same people who once looked down on others started greeting delivery workers with respect. They offered water to couriers on hot days. They smiled instead of sneering. They spoke with kindness instead of mockery. It wasn't because they feared Marcus or his wealth. It was because they had seen themselves in the mirror he had held up, and they didn't like the reflection. They wanted to become better. And though Marcus never returned to scold them again, his lesson lived on in their hearts. They would tell the story years later, reminding their children and grandchildren, "We once laughed at a courier, but that day we learned the true meaning of respect." For Marcus, the lesson wasn't just for them. It was for the world. His silence, his dignity, and his words would remind countless people that you never know who someone really is. The person you laugh at today might be the one who teaches you the greatest truth of your life tomorrow. And that truth would outlive their laughter forever. The weeks turned into months, and yet the memory of that morning never left the neighborhood. The image of Marcus standing tall with quiet dignity, his calm voice reminding them of respect and humanity, stayed fresh in their minds like a scar that could never fade. Life in the wealthy community went on as usual. Cars still gleamed in their driveways, lawns still shone like carpets, and neighbors still gathered outside with coffee in hand. But something invisible had changed. The laughter that once came so easily at the expense of others was gone. In its place was a cautious kindness, a gentleness that had not existed before. When delivery workers arrived, they were no longer invisible. Neighbors offered them a drink, asked about their day, and even carried packages inside with them. Gardeners and cleaners, once ignored, were now greeted with genuine smiles. The same mouths that once whispered cruel jokes now spoke words of respect. It wasn't just guilt, it was growth. The people had learned a lesson so powerful it reshaped their hearts. And at the center of it all was Marcus, the courier they had mocked, the air they had underestimated. Though Marcus continued his work quietly, his presence carried a new weight. Wherever he went, silence followed, not of shame this time, but of reverence. People who once dismissed him now saw him as a living reminder of humility and strength. He didn't have to say a word. His actions had already carved the message deep into their minds. Some nights when the neighbors gathered together, they spoke about him. "Do you remember the first day?" one would ask, shame still lingering in their voice. Another would nod and reply, "Yes, I will never forget how wrong we were." Even children began to notice the difference. Parents taught them, never laugh at someone for how they look. Never judge a person by their clothes or their work. Treat everyone with respect, because you never know who they really are. The lesson Marcus had given them was now being passed to the next generation. Marcus, for his part, never demanded recognition. He never revealed his secret with pride or anger. He let the truth spread naturally, let the people learn on their own. He continued to ride his old bicycle, continued to wear his faded uniform, and continued to deliver packages with a smile. For him, the mission was never about proving who he was. It was about proving who others could become if they chose kindness. But the impact of his story traveled farther than the neighborhood. Word spread through the city, then beyond. Articles were written about the Courier heir, and people everywhere began to reflect on how they treated those around them. Marcus became a symbol, not of wealth, but of humility, dignity, and strength in silence. The neighbors who had once mocked him now carried a different kind of pride. Not pride in their wealth, not pride in their polished houses, but pride in the lesson they had learned. They would tell visitors, "We once laughed at a courier, but that courier taught us something we will carry forever." And so the lasting impact was not in Marcus's name, not in his family's empire, but in the way he changed hearts. His bicycle became more than just a tool for deliveries. It became a reminder that greatness does not need gold or power to shine. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a man who refuses to let cruelty break him. The day they laughed at him was the day they revealed their weakness, but the day they discovered who he was became the day they discovered their strength, the strength to change, to grow, and to respect every soul they met. Marcus rode on, into the streets beyond, his figure small against the wide horizon, but the echo of his presence remained behind, etched into memory. No one in that neighborhood would ever forget the courier who had carried not just packages, but a lesson that would outlive them all. And so, the story of Marcus Collins, the mocked courier who silenced laughter with truth, became more than just a tale. It became a legacy,